On today's episode of Hungry for Wisdom, the older I get, the smarter my dad gets. If you're wondering what to do with all your time once you've canceled Netflix and those other grooming services, I'm sorry, streaming services, my bad, we'll show you. And I'm thinking of adopting a theory of devolution because I think we've literally gotten dumber since ancient times. It is episode 71. Turn it up! Oh, man, today's episode should be dedicated to espresso.
Yes.
Because Bearded Beaver, Pastor Ben, good to see you, buddy.
It's good to be here.
We are both beat. We are tired. So give me a cheers. Give me a cheers up top.
Cheers.
And dear listener, you're going to have to wait while we get prepped for this episode. Oh, you sipped? I just did mine as a shot. Wow.
Oh, no, you sipped this.
No. I did not.
Well,
I got that much left. I can sip that. That is bitter and murky. You could float a horseshoe in that.
Well, it is
good stuff.
It is highly extracted and I won't say good for you, but it's good for you.
It's good for this episode, hopefully.
Yeah. We shall see.
Excuse me while I continue chewing the grounds here. That was good stuff. Literally, though, no, not literally. Actually, is what I meant to say. Today's episode is dedicated to baseball dads of previous generations. And I'm including all Little League and Pee Wee sports in this. Something hit me as I was at the baseball fields watching my son play. And I thought to myself, why do I enjoy this so much? There's just something about this. I'm coaching one of my sons. I'm watching another one. You know, I got 3 boys involved in baseball right now. So we're at the baseball fields all the time. They should just set me up an apartment. And I'm thinking, like, this is really enjoyable, but what is it specifically that I like? Because it's not just the nice Tri-Cities weather. I've been out there in the cold and in the heat and whatever, right? And I think it hit me. I think I put my finger on it. What it is that is the only place, I think, in my life that I can go that doesn't look drastically different than it looked 10 years ago or 20 years ago or something like that as far as the culture goes. Because the world has changed so much and everything has shifted so quickly that there's been like paradigm jostles at the very least in everything. But you go to the baseball fields, it's been the same for 100 years.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for the most part, the uniforms look different, the styles look different, but dads in the 1920s were cheering their sons on and correcting them and telling them to quit screwing around, you know, in the dugout and whatever. It's just like there's a certain beauty to that. So anyway, I appreciate it because it's a connection to previous generations, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today as we get into some wisdom. Come on now. You just went silent on those now.
But I was going to do like some Michael Jackson, like, whoo, kind of a thing. And
you rock my world.
Yeah, but.
Oh, man. All right. So Jeremiah 6:16. I'll catch a second one. Jeremiah 6:16 goes like this. Thus says Yahweh, stand by the roads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is and walk in it and find rest for your souls. Now, simply what the Bible is saying here is don't discount ancient wisdom. It's probably better than whatever you think up in the moment.
Yes. Wisdom that does not innovate.
Yeah, and the examples are multitudinous. And so anyway, I do find an interesting connection. I'm not going to get too far into this because we want to get into some ancient wisdom here and not just what I thought up. I thought it would actually be a little bit hypocritical to give a whole bunch of my new devotional thoughts on a verse like that. So I'm just going to make a couple of quick remarks here. At the end, you know, where it says, go where the good way is and walk in it and find rest for your souls. The gospel is the ancient and good way. Yeah. And so when we return to good old stuff, it might be a new understanding of the gospel, but it's not a new gospel, right? It's the ancient gospel. It's the original gospel. In Revelation 13, Jesus is the Lamb who was slain since the foundations of the earth. This thing is eternally fixed in the heavens, even though it was brought to bear at a certain point on the timeline. And also Matthew 11, I mean, you know, we recognize this immediately from Jeremiah when Jesus says in Matthew 11, he says, look, come to me, all you who are weak and heavy laden. And he finishes that with, I will give you rest, right? I will give you rest for your souls. Jesus is claiming here in Matthew 11 to be the ancient way, which is really interesting. And they got offended at that sometimes when he was like, look, I'm older than Abraham. Before Abraham was born, I am. And they're like, you're not 40 years old yet, and you're talking about how you're older than Abraham. And he was claiming to be the ancient way. And he says, if you return to me, saying that in front of some people he maybe never even met before, right? But Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's the not just the Omega, but he's also the Alpha, right? So when we return to Christ, we're returning to an ancient way. Last scripture verse I'll throw at you for this, Galatians 3:8. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, in you shall all the nations be blessed. So, the gospel is older than Abraham. Let me put this another way. I'm stealing this from my buddy Ryan over at Redeeming Grace Reformed Baptist Church in Kennewick. He said it this way, Christianity is older than Judaism. And so, really, God announced the gospel and then got started with the Abraham thing. Israel happened, but this was all on the pathway to the accomplished work of Christ. And so when we return to the gospel, we return to the ancient path. So again, Jeremiah 6:16. This is just a good one for all you youngins to keep in mind. A good life verse to get you through high school and college, all right? Thus says Yahweh, stand by the road and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it and find rest for your souls. Lastly, I'll say this because it just popped into my brain and I don't have the wisdom not to say it. So here we go. The good path does not mean the perfect path. It is a good thing to look back at previous generations and make little tweaks and improvements. That's
Absolutely.
different. Yeah, that's different than rejecting their entire contribution. We don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think as we get into even our discussion, right, we have to look at our theologians as for example, where they were in their time.
Totally.
You know, and yeah, you accept them at their faults because unless we're talking about Jesus, there ain't nobody perfect.
Yep.
So even, Peter,
Yeah, Paul was like, dude, you got the gospel wrong.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the leader of Christianity. And Paul was like, I don't care. You got the gospel wrong.
Yeah. So there were certainly times where even the most wisest ancient theologian, ancient wisdom, probably errs unless it's in the scriptures.
Yeah, I read I heard this on a podcast. It was two guys talking about the Protestant Reformation and just kicking around the idea that both sides, the Roman Catholics and the Protestants, they were all quoting Augustine, right? He was Luther and Calvin's most frequently quoted theologian, but the Romanists, the Papists, were like, oh no, we're Augustinian, like down to the core. And they said, how do we square this up, right? And one guy's explanation, which he was quoting somebody else, I don't know who, but he said, yeah, basically the Protestant Reformation was it was Augustine's soteriology versus Augustine's ecclesiology.
Oh,
Which means, translation for those of you that aren't nerds, sorry, we totally are. Augustine, some people would say Augustine, I reject it wholeheartedly. Augustine had a soteriology, which is the doctrine of salvation. And the Protestant reformers jumped onto that, and they were like, yes, he was right about this. And they were right that he was right, because that's what the Apostle Paul says about salvation and so on. So it was Augustine's soteriology, his doctrine of salvation, against his ecclesiology, or the doctrine of the church. And his doctrine of the church was such that there is no salvation outside of the church. And so the Papists jumped on top of that and said, hey, the Pope is at the head of the church, and there's no salvation outside of the church. Just see Augustine. Therefore, the Pope is the father of your salvation. And the reformers all threw up in their mouths a little bit.
yes.
And then started screaming in German and French and Latin and probably tongues, although none of them would have validated that gift, but I'm sure they got pretty close to it when they heard the Pope talk. So anyway, no theologian was perfect, right? So it's a good thing then to take their contributions, chew the meat, spit out the bones, but also realize like some of these guys they thought way more deeply through a lot of these issues than we do.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why we value creeds and confessions so much, is not because they're infallible or not because they're on equal footing with Scripture in terms of authority, but just because these are some of the greatest teachers that have ever lived. Like, you'd be an idiot not to listen to these guys.
Yeah.
So speaking of the ancient paths, we decided what we're going to do today is, this is the Mount Rushmore episode. So you guys are familiar with Mount Rushmore, probably more than me, because I can't name the 4 presidents that are on Mount Rushmore. Listen, I went to public school in Washington State on the west side. All right? This is not my fault. I'm a victim. You see that V on my forehead? Okay, so let's see. It's Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Jefferson.
I think that's right.
Is that about right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we got to do is we need to keep it to 4 in each of these categories, and we're going to build our Mount Rushmore of stuff.
Of Mount Rushmore of stuff. We've got our Mount Rushmore of a disciple's personal library. You know, like what's going to be the most helpful if you're going to start even start like leading a small group or something like that. Where what's a good resource? You're diving into Bible study and you need some good resources. Of course, the Bible being number one
resource,
right, the resource. But what might help you unpack, you know, shades of meaning, or even help you unpack some of the cultural colloquialisms and things like that are in there.
This morning I was reading Ezekiel 11, and Ezekiel 11:3. I have no idea what it's talking about. Right, and so I'm reading. It doesn't matter. Like right now, I don't need to get into the whole thing. But like I read Ezekiel 11:3, and I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like this is nonsense to me. So where do you go to figure stuff like that out?
Yeah.
Right? There were no cross references with it either. I couldn't go to a different part of the Bible because it was a, you know, one-time thing. So anyway. Yeah, so if you're not a pastor, I got a bunch of books because I'm a pastor and I need a bunch of books. Then you go into your office, there's a bunch of books.
A lot.
Yeah, but, you know, if you're an electrician or you're a garbage man or a stay-at-home mom or whatever, you don't have an office full of books. What are the essentials?
Yeah. I even think of like books that if there were ways to find like translated ones, what would I take out on the field to just give away to these like young pastors and stuff like that, you know? So let's see here. Want me to go first on what my Mount Rushmore would be?
Okay, you only get 4.
I know, this is hard.
I'll bet you and I are going to have some of the same ones.
I think so. It's kind of terrifying. All right, so my Mount Rushmore of a disciple's personal library. I think first off, a good... if I'm going to try and understand even where a passage is at, or if I'm going to be working through some kind of theology, I think one of the best things that I can do right off the bat is to get a good study Bible. And I'd say my one that's like top that's currently available.
Schofield.
No. My top, and for those of you who like Schofield, like I'm not trying to be a jerk or anything like that, but I think my top study Bible would be the ESV study Bible. I just think that the notes are helpful for both the layman and actually for, I mean, I use them all the time too. So they're helpful for the person who's not making it their profession to teach the scriptures, but also for someone who would be teaching more. I think they're very, very helpful.
I should have checked the ESV study notes on Ezekiel 11:3.
Why did you not?
Because the one who can't do teaches, Ben. That's why.
Well, okay. Well, there we go. So I think that's very helpful. Now, I will say this: if you have access or can find an NIV study Bible from like the mid 80s, okay, we're talking the one that's got kind of the beige or the beige and blue.
The Bible has a mullet.
Yeah, it does have a mullet, basically. That is, I really appreciate the notes on that one. Those are also very, very helpful. I think it was just before Zondervan got bought out by HarperCollins, and so a lot of more of the looser theology that came with HarperCollins didn't necessarily...
Filthy lucre.
Yeah, I know. It didn't come into play there. But so that would be my first one.
But I will say this about study Bibles, too. The ESV study Bible is top dog. And no questions in my mind on that. The NIV study Bible, though, some people don't like the 2011 NIV translation, which I get. And we've talked about it on this podcast before. It's still a good translation. There are places to push back on it, but hey, it's a translation.
Yeah.
But... the NIV Study Bible, it's like full color, and it's a brick, man. This thing is huge.
Yep.
Edited by D.A. Carson, so you know it's not going to be garbage. Like Carson is dependable as they come. And it is really, really good.
Yeah,
so I'm going to give
helpful.
some shout-outs to that one, too.
Absolutely. So you've got a good study Bible. My recommendation would be ESV. Also, I forgot about this. A good study Bible, especially when it comes to what it offers, is if you're going to like start teaching through a text, one of the things that I'll do is I will actually read the introduction to the whole book.
Yes.
Because it will give you, times, dates, even talk about some scholarly conjecture about when it was actually written. Those things can be important.
Major themes.
Yeah.
That's a big, especially in a big book. Like, if you're reading Isaiah, you just get lost in the weeds pretty quick. And so it's important to, be able to have in your mind, like, here's some major themes to look out for. Here's kind of the main outline. Here's where you're at in the map, that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. And then maybe where it fits within the rest of, like Revelation, with the rest of progressive Revelation, right? So where does Galatians fit in the whole New Testament? What's going on there? And some of that some of it is really just encapsulating what is probably already present in the book, and they're just kind of pointing those things out. So because you can, when you're breezing through the book, you might skip over a number of things because you're locked onto certain themes. Well, these guys have tried to pull out all of those themes, and they want those absolutely present. So I find the introductory material both Actually, I haven't read the introductory material for the NIV study on most books, but definitely the introductory material in the ESV study Bible is super helpful.
Well, like let's take an example, Leviticus. That's commonly known as one of the most boring books in the Bible, right? Because it's just these weird, obscure laws that seem to have no bearing on our lives. So if you go through the introduction on a study Bible and you read the introduction to Leviticus, it's a couple of pages, right?
Yep.
But then you jump into it, you will enjoy it so much more.
Yeah.
Because you'll have points of contact. You'll have a frame to hang it on, right?
Absolutely. So you've got just your study Bible. My second one, I think my second book that I would love to have in everybody's library is a systematic theology. And for me, I think I go with what's most approachable. I'm thinking, again, what's going to be most approachable and actually what's probably most prolific, both because it's been translated into so many languages. You've got Wayne Grudem's systematic theology. Now, you could go to as what they call as baby theology, which is basically, I believe it's like Christian doctrine.
I think it's biblical doctrine.
Biblical doctrine. But not to be confused with John MacArthur's biblical doctrine, which is a different systematic theology. It's great, but you've got Big Grudem, and sometimes we call it Baby Grudem, right? And so a good systematic theology, and the reason I like Grudem's, especially for someone who maybe doesn't have a full-time job in ministry or anything like that, is you not only get a really healthy interaction and discussion on the various issues in theology and things like that, but also you have this really rich devotional aspect to it as well. You get to the end of a chapter, and all of a sudden you've got application questions. I mean, he's just laid out for you this rich theology of the person of Jesus Christ, and all of a sudden it's like hard question number 1, heart searching question number 2, and even like here's a hymn that speaks to this very thing. It's really cool.
In his second edition, he did a hymn and a contemporary song on each subject, which some of them were a little bit of a reach, but I thought that was a cool move.
Yeah. So you've got a good systematic theology. Now, there's other ones out there that are good. You got John MacArthur's. You got Frames, who loves his triangles. You've got and Frame he's definitely coming at it from more of a Presbyterian standpoint.
Yeah.
So, but excellent. Highly philosophical. I mean, this one is definitely like 4 cups of coffee per chapter.
Yeah,
kind of a
John
thing.
Frame, he rabbit trails a lot, but he picks really good rabbit trails,
and they're great. They're amazing.
That's the thing,
right?
Yeah, I wouldn't make John Frame my only one.
No,
but it's good reading if you get time.
And then back when I was in school, we would read Millard Erickson's, and I appreciate it, but it was always. He was so good at presenting both sides of every different argument that you never really knew what was going on.
I remember reading that book saying, "Profess something, professor."
So which I mean, again, if you're looking at it from a textbook standpoint, you're a college professor trying to get students to interact with ideas. Okay, fine. I mean, that's great because he's not presenting straw man arguments. In other words, weak arguments or the weakest argument for some kind of cause. He's presenting the strongest arguments for both. And
Erickson is very academic also. So if you want to know how guys talk in rooms where they're like PhD candidates and stuff, they're reading Erickson. That's how they talk.
Yeah. So, but Grudem's systematic theology, whether you get Baby Grudem or you get Big Grudem, it's awesome,
Grudem.
Right? That's so. We've got a good ESV study Bible. You've got Grudem's systematics, and then I would say a good. I would say a really good. I just lost my train of thought, and I don't have it on my phone right now.
Go with theology book because you'll get back to the other one.
Okay, theology book. Yeah, Knowing God.
You took my theology book.
I'm sorry.
Dang it.
Knowing God is probably one of the most. It's just a really solid. It's systematic theology, but it's written in more layman's terms, and it's so helpful.
I do know God. You know what I know about God? He says, "Thou shalt not steal," and you just stole my theology book off my Mount Rushmore. Repent, sinner.
How many books have I actually stolen off your Mount Rushmore right now? I want to say that I think I probably hit about
like 2.5.
2.5. There we go. Right. So you've got that, and then I think finally. Okay, either Knowing God or Mere Christianity.
Are you kidding me right now?
I know. I'm sorry.
What are you leaving me with?
Okay, I'm sorry. That would be one of my theology book. And Mere Christianity is more of an apologetic book, which I would say because it's just a real reasonable argumentation for the Christian faith. Now it is a bit dated in the sense that it's probably 50 plus years old, but it's by C.S. Lewis. It's a great book, and it just again I like the fact that it shows that our faith is reasonable. And I just love that. It's just really easy and helpful. But my fourth book, I would say, probably a good primer on what is commonly known as biblical theology, how the whole scriptures are made up. And I'm not talking about, okay, this is Genesis and it's part of the Pentateuch and all that kind of stuff, but really what's tracing some of the major storylines of the scriptures and how they all fit together and how all the scriptures are pointing towards Christ. And so a good biblical theology book, for example, and it's mercifully short, it's not super heady, is one by Von Roberts called God's Big Picture. Now, I will say this, if you're a dyed in the womb, premillennial dispensationalist, it's probably going to be very frustrating because he's missing a chapter. And that would be as he's describing the kingdom of God as it's being laid out over all of history. He jumps, obviously, because he's a non-millennialist, he'll jump from the church age all the way to the end times. Whereas if even myself being a historical premillennialist, I would say, nope, I think there's something missing here. There seems to be this nice, 1,000-year period where Jesus is running things and things are awesome. So I would say it's missing a chapter, but it's actually one of the base textbooks we use for when we're trying to give a good high view, 2,000-foot level view of Scripture in the Gospel Growth Program that we run.
Yeah, it's always like that with theology books. You always have to hand it with a caveat, right? Like, there's a Ladd, George Eldon Ladd. There's a George Eldon Ladd book called, I think it's The Gospel of the Kingdom. Great little book, just phenomenal little book. And I give that to people, and I'm like, skip the chapter on Israel. Because for some reason, out of nowhere, my boy just goes into replacement theology. And I'm like, dude, that was not necessary. So I'm just like, all right, skip chapter 9 or whatever it is. But All right, so you got ESV Study Bible, you got Grudem, you cheated. You've got the two-headed monster, Knowing God and Mere Christianity.
I did cheat.
You suck, by the way. And then you've got God's Big Picture by Von Roberts.
Yes.
Okay. My list is going to look similar, and I'm going to have to figure out a different theology book because my plan B was Mere Christianity and my plan A was Knowing God. So I'm going to have to talk myself into this one. I'm definitely going ESV Study Bible. I have often said that if I could only have one book for sermon prep, I would choose the ESV Study Bible.
Yeah, agreed.
If I was locked in a cell and I had to prep sermons, that would be it, right? Excuse me, coffee's kicking in. Yeah, systematic theology, gotta have it. And I as well will go Grudem. Specifically the second edition. Man, that second edition is really good. He beefed up the chapters on... he beefed up the sections on like biblical ethics, and he beefed up the chapters on the cults because, the first one was written in 94 or something, and Mormonism has changed shape since then and kind of moved the goalpost. And Islam has, a lot of stuff has changed in Islam since 94 because 9/11 changed the whole conversation, right? So he's updated a lot of that. The second edition of Grudem is, I think, about 6.5 feet thick.
Yes.
It's a beast, but man, it's good. I get that in Spanish and give it out on the mission field.
Oh, totally. And I think it's interesting. I think that systematics really should be updated. I think because one of my profs wasn't Wellham. Oh, shoot. I forget. He was one of my profs at I forget the class. It's going to come to Bruce Ware. Bruce Ware.
I knew it. I knew you were going to name drop your pedigree. I'm so jealous.
Dude, I'm not trying to name drop
these guys.
There were video classes. I think that maybe I interacted with them twice via email, and I'm not even sure if it was that. It might have been a TA, right?
More than me.
So, but he would say that systematic theology actually answers questions even at the time. Right. And so I think that's interesting. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of Calvin's Institutes, although I have not read through them all, but they were written at a particular time addressing particular questions. And so they're going to be helpful to a point, but I think that the more contemporary a systematic theology is, the more it answers a lot of the questions for its time.
Yep.
And I even, and this is where one of my hopes and prayers is that at some point we'll actually see some of our brothers in Latin America or in Africa actually write their own systematic theologies that are addressing the questions on poverty. I don't think a rich white boy from Cleveland can certainly discuss poverty and discuss what the Bible says about it. But I think that sometimes we're not actually even thinking of the questions that come up more. And I'm just pulling something out, but I'm just saying is that there's a level to which they can address that. I'm not saying I'm not saying that we don't have the ability to address it, or that the Bible doesn't have it, but they can ask questions that I think might help them. And so, for example, I would love it if we had some of our Spanish brothers writing a good systematic, and if we knew how solid they were, then it's like, I don't need to bring a translation of Grudem. You have one right here. Let's publish it.
Yeah, get Gomez over there to give you his. Yeah, and I don't think this will be disagreeing with you. I think I'm amplifying what you're saying here. But just to clarify, the guy who grew up in poverty can write a systematic theology addressing poverty, and we need that in addition to the removed academic treatment of it, right? Not instead of. Yeah. And they are doing this now. Guys in Ghana and in like the Ethiopian Anglicans are kicking.
Oh my gosh, those guys are crazy.
Yeah, they're cranking it out.
And not like that, but like, some of the stuff they've been talking about with like breaking from the English church.
They did it.
I know.
They were like, hey, English, you can get out of Anglicanism because you guys have compromised. So take a hike. And I was just like, Africa.
Oh man,
thank you, boys.
Well done.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So I got an ESV study Bible. I got Grudem, big Grudem. I'm going to say that every disciple who needs a couple of study resources should get John MacArthur's verse-by-verse commentary on the Bible.
Agreed.
Now, opinions about MacArthur vary. I personally love him, even though sometimes, he'll say something because he's old and old guys can get away with it. And I'm like, okay, you're getting away with that because you're old, not because that was a great thing to say, But you got to be like, you got to appreciate the cranky grandpa in a rocking chair that just doesn't have to give a crap about what anybody thinks about what he says. He's like, this is the way it is because I've been around 9 times as long as you, and I'm smarter than everybody in the room, and this is the way it is. And you need that guy, and I'm really glad he's out there. So, with all those caveats in place, the John MacArthur verse-by-verse Bible commentary is one of the most useful resources I have ever used or put in anybody's hands, because if you go to a verse, like, I should have checked this on Ezekiel 11:3.
You could have done that.
Actually, to tell you the truth, man, here's what happened. Rabbit trail. I was here at the office early this morning because I didn't preach here this morning. We preached out at Burbank, right? And I didn't have to do all my normal Sunday morning stuff, so I'm just sitting here just geeking out in the Hebrew text, and it jumped out at me. And then when I wanted to look into it, I didn't have time because people started showing up and I had to leave. So I'm getting myself off the hook on that one. But what you could do in a situation like that is go grab your MacArthur verse-by-verse Bible commentary and just look up, like just flip to it. It's set up the same way as the Bible, right? So you flip to Ezekiel, you go to chapter 11, verse 3, and you say, what in the world does this mean? And then he'll say, this means this, or the two opinions on this are this. And here are the 9 different Bible passages that it connects to. And then it's a paragraph, and it's done. Now, it's a big book, but anytime you're not made to read the whole thing. Right? That's not the point. It's a reference book. So you just flip to the part you need, and it's so concise and so clear that I think that's really, really helpful for people. Okay. Yes, we study Bible. I got one.
Oh no.
Oh no, I got 2, and now I got to pick.
Or you could pull a mulligan, and
I could do the 2-headed monster.
You could do 2-headed monster. Yeah. I'll give you a pass on the 2-headed monster.
Nope, I'm not doing it. Here's what I'm doing. Here's where I'm going.
What?
I'm going to go a good, solid confession of the faith.
Okay.
Either the one that we read from here, 1689 London Baptist Confession, and the Founders Ministry puts out the 1689 Baptist Confession in modern English, which is really good and helpful because the old one's kind of King James-ish, because guess what? It's from 1689.
Go figure.
Yeah, really. They should have been more upfront with that. But yeah, that's just a really good kind of get your hands around the doctrine. It'll walk you through basic scripture and things like that and articulate it super well. I'm going to go with either the 1689 or I think Westminster Confession of Faith, just because it's probably the most expansive, unless you're going to go with Luther's larger catechism. But I'm not a Lutheran, so there's things in Luther that I'd be like, yeah, skip that part, whatever.
Yeah.
All right. That's my Mount Rushmore.
That's fair.
ESV Study Bible, Wayne Grudem Systematic Theology, MacArthur's Bible Commentary, and a good confession of the faith. I'll go 1689.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well done, sir. All right.
That was not easy.
I know, man. It's Mount Rush. Now we have Mount Rushmore number 2.
Oh boy.
All right. Here we go. We must scale the heights of the next Mount Rushmore.
Need another espresso.
I know exactly.
Clearly.
We must now come up with our Mount Rushmore of dead theologians. So I'm assuming that essentially what we must. By the way, we're saying that their physical body is dead, because we obviously would know if they're good theologians. They're kicking it with our brother the thief that was on the cross. They're kicking it with our brother Paul. They're kicking it with our brother Peter.
Probably not with Lot's wife.
Probably. Yeah, I don't know about that one.
Yeah,
but and even then they're still getting their theology corrected, because again, ain't nobody perfect. But Mount Rushmore of dead theologians, and you're gonna make me go?
No,
All right.
no. I'm gonna go first on this one because I'm gonna steal some of yours.
That's good. That's awesome. Let's see how much we agree on this one.
I've literally put zero thought into this.
I know. Boy, this is really scary.
I'm going Athanasius.
I knew it.
Did you know I was gonna?
I knew you were gonna go Athanasius. Absolutely.
That's my boy. He's the Black Dwarf, man. That was the greatest nickname ever. That was back before PC police were around. So, all right, Athanasius, because probably the one that articulated the Nicene Creed, right? History would suggest. His little booklet on the Incarnation is some of the greatest Christology ever written. You can get it for free. The PDF is online because, he's been dead a long time, so it's public domain now. But CCEL, the Christian Classic Ethereal Library.org, I think it is, .org. Anyway, all of his stuff is up there. Go read you some Athanasius, man. Dude's a boss. By the way, he articulated the Trinity, not only the best that anybody had up to that point, but he's still probably top 5 articulators of the doctrine of the Trinity and the deity of Christ specifically that we've had since then. And he was in the 300s.
Yeah.
That was my dog. So, Athanasius, much love, brother. Can't wait to meet you. I got to quit talking to dead people. I can't wait to meet him. Not into seances. All right.
Lord, we are grateful for Athanasius.
Well, yeah,
there we go.
Absolutely. All right. So I got Athanasius. I'm going to go with William Tyndale.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not because he was so much a theologian per se, but because he translated the Bible into English. This is after John Wycliffe, but Tyndale was frankly a better theologian than Wycliffe, and his translation he was a better translator also. Wycliffe's translation wasn't that good. The important thing was that he did it. It wasn't the quality of it, right? Also, John Wycliffe, who was about 150 years before William Tyndale, he actually backed off under a certain amount of pressure, whereas my boy Tyndale did not.
Yeah.
Got burned at the stake, and his last words were, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." And God apparently heard him, because within a year of William Tyndale getting burned at the stake in 1536, I believe it was, then the English Bible had gone from being illegal in England, death-worthy penalty to have one, to promoted by the king. Something happened in there politically, which I won't get into right now, where the king was like, you know what? This is a good idea. We should go ahead and stamp that thing. Go for it. And so...
Sorry, William.
Yeah, no joke. Like, did they apologize to his family? No, sir.
Of course not.
No. Anyway, Tyndale. By the way, he got burned at the stake on my birthday, October 6th. So, yeah, there you go.
Right.
Yeah. Tyndale. I just love that guy. The more you read about Tyndale, the more you're going to dig him. All right, I'm going obscure on this one. This isn't really that obscure if you read church history, but most people haven't heard of this guy. John Huss.
Yes. All right.
Bringing out the Hussites. All right, so John Huss was a Bohemian. Like, who does that anymore? John Huss, that's who. He
Mama.
Didn't mean to start a Reformation, but I did. So he was a Catholic priest who was over it.
Oh, yeah.
He just had no time for the nonsense. So what happened was he articulated all of this stuff about, hey, the Pope can be wrong, and we should stop giving allegiance to the Pope that we should give to God, and indulgences are evil, and communion doesn't save you, only the gospel saves you. And this is 100 years before Luther. Now, Luther had never heard of this guy. Luther started his Reformation, and then somebody, when he was in hiding, somebody gave Luther a bunch of tracts from John Huss, and Luther read them, and he was like, Luther made this famous comment. He said, "We've been Hussites all along, and we didn't even know it."
Yes.
So Huss was kind of the unsung hero, sort of the tip of the spear, and he didn't start the Protestant Reformation, but he laid the groundwork courageously and alone, and he also got martyred. He laid the groundwork alone that strengthened a lot of the Reformation once it got kicked off from other angles. And so I just think that, like, the more Huss that I read and the more history about Huss that I read, the more I like him. So I'm going there. All right, so I'm going, what did I say there? Athanasius, William Tyndale, John Huss. I got the 300s covered. I got the 14 and 1500s covered. I mean, would it be too cheesy to go Spurgeon? That might be too easy. Or Edwards. Edwards, who's more? Okay. Here's what I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with what?
Well, I just was looking up something on my.
You think it's gonna be this? Okay. I'm gonna go with Jonathan Edwards.
Literally stole him from me.
Because I think that he was more foundational and important. He is the father of American Christianity, essentially, and rightfully so. Now, he wasn't even actually an American because he was colonial. He was technically an English citizen, but he was the father of he was the spiritual father of the American Revolution for sure. That's my Mount Rushmore. I'm going those guys. Athanasius, who. Well, okay, if you guys can get any Athanasius and read it, then it'll be perfectly comprehensible to you. It's fancy, it's a little hoity-toity, but it's not difficult stuff. William Tyndale, you should read history about him.
Yes.
He said a funny thing that I'll mention in a second. And then John Huss, you should read everything about him and everything by him that you can get your hands on. And Jonathan Edwards, that's some thick stuff.
Yes.
Those pages do not turn quickly.
No.
But that's some of the deepest thought. You know what? One thing I love about Edwards is he married up beautifully the emotional experience of Christianity with the intellectual rigor of Christianity.
Yep.
And so these days we got to fight a lot between, like the experience driven people and the data driven people. And Edwards was just a wonderful blend of both, and pretty extreme in both categories. When I say extreme experientially, not to say that he was untethered from the text in his experience. Nothing of the sort. But some of his most rousing passages are talking about just something that God did to him in the woods, this experience that he had with God in the woods. Or like one of his famous illustrations is, I can tell you all about how sweet the taste of honey is. And you can agree with everything I say. But you can't know what honey tastes like until you actually taste it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's so true.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then he preached Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which essentially kicked off the First Great Awakening and changed the culture. After the First Great Awakening, or during the First Great Awakening, the culture was so dark. It was actually worse then in the colonies than it is in America now by quite a large margin. The gap was not small. It was way worse back then in terms of morality and conduct, if you can believe it, because there were fewer regenerate Christians. And then a whole ton of people get saved, and they were having problems like they couldn't get their animals to obey because the owners and the farmers wouldn't curse anymore. They didn't use foul language, and that was all the animals had ever heard. And so all of a sudden, the ox aren't moving because they're not being yelled at in F-bombs and profanities anymore. And so there was such a moral revival that they actually literally had agricultural production problems for a little while where they had to retrain their animals. So that's my Rushmore. What do you got?
Okay, so my Rushmore, I'm gonna go from periods, right? So I'm gonna go with Augustine. Sorry,
fair
his
game.
Confessions, man, just mind-boggling.
City of God, what?
Totally, yeah, and his defense of the sheer idea that he's writing this excellent defense of why Christianity is not responsible for the fall of the Roman Empire,
and he's writing it during the fall of the Roman Empire.
He's a solid guy. So you've got Augustine, and again, you've already talked about it on this podcast, right? That his concept of soteriology so strong, especially against Pelagius and a lot of the heresies that were going on at that time, prevenient grace, meaning, you can kind of choose God and all this or you can fully choose God and you can reject him and all this stuff. And Augustine's like going, that's not what the Bible says.
Yeah, Pelagius was like, you're born good until you choose not to be. And Augustine is like, I got a Bible here. Now, either we're going to talk about it or I'm going to beat you to death with it. What's it going to be?
Or it's like, I got a Bible and I've also had a 2-year-old. Yeah, I'm like, how many children do you have again? Because I don't think I remember teaching my kid how to say no. I think they already knew how to do it.
Yep.
So you've got Augustine. I'm going to fast forward probably pretty quick up to, I'm gonna fast forward pretty quick up to the Protestant Reformation, and of course, I'm I'm going to do it.
Do it.
I'm going it for Luther.
Really?
I'm going it for Luther.
Didn't see it. Now, why in the world would you nominate Martin Luther for your Mount Rushmore?
Well, only because he's my great 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 uncle. So that just to say that I mean there's so much if you haven't seen, I mean there's a couple different movies on Luther. There's a documentary that was put out by I think it was Ligonier Ministries actually put it out for a while, and it was excellent. It was
Oh, that was the one with the man with the very calming English accent.
Exactly.
That was a great documentary.
Yeah. It was great because it didn't they didn't use a whole lot of, they used some of the artwork, but then there was some really good animation that went with it, and it was really stellar and just artistically well done. McCaskill is the guy who produced that particular documentary. Went and visited certain places. You can kind of tell in some ways it's kind of guerrilla journalism because he's going into like all these different places with like just his little camcorder and not like really good lighting,
like a CIA like button cam or something.
It's good, but it's good. It's worthwhile. I mean, I think I bought it back in the day. I think Ligonier actually has it open for right now. But you've also got the one that had Joseph Fiennes in it is a really excellent.
Yeah.
It's an excellent biography. There's nothing I would say that is bad about it per se. And then you've got the old school the old school black and white one, and I forget which one that is.
Yeah,
but that
was good. I think Fiennes maybe they softened the character of Luther a little bit, but historically it was decent.
And the way that there's just some really wonderful. There was some wonderful storytelling in certain scenes, like when I always love it when he presents when Luther's presenting to Prince Philip his very own copy of the Bible, and he's like, yes, and his fingers are itching.
Can I touch it?
Yeah, he wants to hold this Bible, and then it's like he embraces it to his chest, or he puts it up to his face,
and he was blind and he couldn't even see. Like he couldn't even read the thing, but he knew how precious it was to have a Bible in German.
And he was it was just so touching. I think actually the first time I saw it, I wept because this guy had never been able to see or hold the Word of God for himself, and now all of a sudden he's like, you mean someone could read this to me and I actually can understand it in German?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You remember that scene where before he kicked off the Reformation, where he was teaching in the seminary classroom and he started railing against indulgences?
Yes.
Like in the classroom in a Catholic seminary. And
he
was like, I paid me money to spring mom from purgatory, and it turns out I didn't know, the priest didn't tell me that for a few extra quid I could have gotten grandpa out as well.
Yeah.
The students are all laughing.
And I mean the production on that particular on the Joseph Fiennes Luther movie is just so good. I mean, you've got I can't remember his name now. I'm forgetting. But there's so many good actors in that, and they do a great job at that. Tetzel. Who played Tetzel?
I don't know that guy's name. I see him everywhere.
He played Dr. Octavius in Spider-Man.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm just letting you know. They had some good actors in there. Oh man, I forgot his name. But anyway, so Luther will be my second. And then I'm going to start going to a little bit more contemporary. I'm going to go Edwards. All right. You can't, I mean, his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, was so transformational to me. I read that because my teacher said this is an example of how awful Puritan preachers were. This is like
the same thing.
And I read the whole thing, and then it's like, but my textbook cut it off just before he went to, but God has opened up the door through Christ, right? Or Christ has thrown wide the door to salvation. It's like all it's just basically talking about is the just wrath of God upon sinners. And so he spends 5,000 words. And so most your school textbooks will truncate that last 1,000 words off. And then you read those last 1,000 words, you're going, this is the grace of God. He's willing to forbear, all of that wrath that we just talked about. And he's actually put it onto his son. I mean,
which just goes to show you that men love the darkness, right? Because he walks you through the darkness in that sermon, and then he shows you the light at the end, and that's the part they cut out of the textbooks because they suck.
Exactly. And I remember when I found that whole sermon and read it, I went back to my American Lit teacher in class in front of everybody. I said, "You're actually misrepresenting what's going on here." And it was
Get him,
funny.
Luther.
Oh man, I did kind of go Luther.
You had a little bit of grandpa coming out there, didn't you?
Oh yes, I did. So that was, and the other thing that's really interesting about Jonathan Edwards is he is probably one of the finest theological minds, if not of his era, maybe of America. I mean,
I think maybe of the history of the English speaking world.
Yeah.
And That might be aiming too small.
Yeah, I mean, he just a lot of the things, and even just his religious affections and things like that. I mean, just the idea that you usually you would have either the folks that feel and the folks that think, like you have mentioned, right? And he just weds those so beautifully. It's like you can't be a solid theologian and not feel something just amazing when you're contemplating the gospel and all that God has done, right?
Yeah,
And
Edwards was very, very heady, but it was anything but dead orthodoxy.
absolutely, just amazing, right? And again, we think about he was a man in his history, right? And so he was during the colonies, and he did have slaves. Yes, I understand that. Yes, I'm not advocating slavery by saying he was a good theologian. I think that and Luther. I love my super great uncle, but
Dude.
he had some pretty harsh words for our Jewish friends.
This podcast is not long enough for the disclaimers necessary to endorse Luther.
All right, and then you get into now I'm going to jump a little bit further up. My last two are going to be from this last century.
All right, I know one of them. Oh, hold on, let me see if I can guess the other one. I'm going Karnak here. Can I get to? All right, hold on. I'm going to mute us for a second.
Okay.
All right, so. Okay, I only got one.
All right, so my first one, who's before the one that you guessed,
Okay.
is going to be J.I. Packer.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
Right, my
Yes.
man J.I. Packer, and it actually my introduction to J.I. Packer was knowing God, but what endeared me to J.I. Packer was his introduction to The Death of Death by John Owen.
So good.
It's going to be there's going to be certain. I think even if we actually ever do our expositional preaching in it, I'm actually putting that in there, just because it's a solid. It's funny when the introduction becomes almost as famous, if not more famous, than the work itself.
Right.
And I would say that his introduction, which Death of Death, is really just talking about limited atonement or the atonement, and J.I. Packer's defense of the Reformed Protestant view of the atonement is just so masterful, and it's so well written, and it's understandable, and which is a huge contrast to John Owen, who was writing, again, not because he's unintelligent, but he's writing in 15th, 16th century English, and the structure of sentences is completely different. The structure of thought is completely different.
Well, and he was like the provost of Oxford.
Yeah.
I mean, he was writing for that audience.
Yeah, so he just encapsulates and makes everything so approachable there. So I just love J.I. Packer. He's awesome.
Now, that's interesting because of who you're going to say next.
Yeah.
Those two guys wound up on the opposite side of a very important table throughout
They
history.
did.
So, yeah, they almost came to blows one time.
Yeah, I would, being at that dinner table, that would have been very tense, and I'm pretty certain who I would have sided with.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But I would have written that story immediately.
Yeah, but so my last one, recently departed Saint R.C. Sproul. Yeah, man, that guy. I mean, for someone who is as Presbyterian as they come, for a Baptist to be like, hey, I really like. He was just an amazing guy, both to sit and actually watch teach one time, and also to see him interact with people whom he disagreed with, and he was still able to do it graciously.
Yep. Some of his best friends were guys he disagreed with.
Yeah, I mean, and even you see him interacting with John MacArthur, over various things. And I mean, John MacArthur had his number on a number of them, and that was fine. Paedo-baptism. John MacArthur lit him up one side and then the other.
If you guys want to have some fun, go listen to the debate between John MacArthur and R.C. Sproul on infant baptism. And it's just two buddies pulling out every weapon they've got.
Yeah.
And so loving between the two of them.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was one of the best debates I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost kind of put that on par with, say, for example, Dr. James White and I think it's Michael Brown.
Michael Brown, yes.
Because these guys love each other, and man, but when they debate, boy, the boxing gloves are on, and they are just having it. I love it.
And they're smiling the whole time.
Oh yeah, they totally love it. But you look at what was and really what sealed it for me was his book, The Holiness of God.
Oh yeah,
That thing.
That's a must read.
Oh my gosh, you want to? It's not an exposition of Isaiah 40 at all. I mean, it's not, but it is so humbling.
It's an exposition of the character of God.
Totally, and it is. Oh my gosh, you can't. I mean, it's one of those things where whether I was listening to the audiobook of it, But you sit there and when something nails you right between the eyes, it's like your brain just kind of weds all of the information that's coming to you. And so I remember what I was doing.
Yep.
I remember the various, what was on the shelves of my garage at that point. As I,
that moment is frozen in time.
It is frozen in time.
It was that formative. And the funny thing about the holiness of God, we've all got those books that we've read that were paradigm shifters for us. But the holiness of God it is predictable that when somebody reads it, that will be one of them for them.
Absolutely.
70% of the time, that's going to be a game changer.
Yep. So you got Augustine, you got Luther, you've got Packer, and you've got R.C. Sproul.
All right, so let's do this then. Lightning round on your Mount Rushmore. One work to read from each of these guys. So we got the last two, right? We got Holiness of God by Sproul, and we got Knowing God on the shelf from J.I. Packer. What's one must read from Luther and one must read from Augustine?
Ooh, okay. I like Bondage of the Will.
Okay.
Because it also, Bondage of the Will.
Okay. For Luther, I'm going to go with his commentary on Galatians. And specifically, if you read nothing else in that, his intro to the commentary on Galatians.
Boom.
Legendary.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. And then Augustine, I'm going to go Confessions.
Yeah, we can't really say City of God because it's like 1,500 pages.
Yeah. Confessions.
Confessions? Yeah. I would say Contra Pelagium.
Yep.
Yeah, just listen to him. In English, it's Against Pelagius.
Yeah.
He just shreds that poor guy. I almost felt bad for a heretic by the end of that. I was like, there's nothing left to say.
Yeah. All right, so that's our Mount Rushmore of dead theologians. And, so do we lightning round the Mount Rushmore of missionary biographies? I will say that I'm going to have to do a little bit of work on that one. Or do we just... Okay.
Yeah. Let's... I don't think this one's going to take as long because if we talk about all of them, then...
Yeah.
They won't need to buy the book and read it.
Yeah.
Which reading the book is going to be a lot more helpful than listening to me talk about it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So why don't I go first and that'll give you a chance to brainstorm. I haven't even thought about this. I threw it on the sheet because I was like, we should do a third Mount Rushmore. How about this one? Well, and the other reason for this was because at the beginning of the year in a sermon, I said, hey, guys, we're going to take some opportunities this year to throw out some more church history type of things because we need to be connected with our history. And so that's why I threw this on there, not because I had thought deeply about it. But this is actually a pretty easy one for me because I got my faves. So on one of them, I'm going to cheat. But I know three of them off the top of my head. So one of them is going to be To the Golden Shore, which is written by some chick. I don't know who, but it was I think it was published in 1954, 1956. And it's a biography of Adoniram Judson. And it is one of the most beautifully written books ever. And you get it in the mail or at a store. I can never find it at the store, so I have to get it in the mail. But it's thick and it looks intimidating. And it's like, oh no. And as soon as you crack it open, you can't put it down. It is just gorgeous. It's borderline poetry at parts of it. Goldie somebody? Anyway, To the Golden Shore of Adoniram Judson. I'm also going to go with Peace Child.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, I'm going to go with Peace Child because that is just kind of that's a paradigm shifter in terms of how you see the gospel applying to people that you have nothing in common with. So go read Peace Child. That one's not long either. And then my third one that I'm cheating on is John Piper did a lecture. Yeah. What were these called? Contending for Our All or something like that?
I forget, but they turned them into PDFs, I think, even too.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Everything that Piper's ever written is free on Desiring God. You can get the PDF for it. But he would do lectures at their conference every year on a different missionary. And it was like an hour-long biographical sketch of this missionary, and they were enthralling. Well, they put it all out in a book, a big fat book, and it's called 21 Servants of Sovereign Joy. Because if it's Piper, you have to include sovereignty and you have to include joy, right?
Exactly.
So 21
desiring something.
Right. You got to be desiring something, you hedonist. So if it's 21 biographies that are probably, I don't know, 15 pages each, 20 pages each. So it's a big, thick book. But man, it's great because they're just these short little bada bing, bada boom things. Oh, I know my other one. My other one is going to be, it's out of that series, A Long Line of Godly Men, those little biographies. It's a tiny thing and it's quick to read. And it's the biography about John Owen. And it's called John Owen's, or the Trinitarian Devotion of John Owen. And it's by Sinclair Ferguson. And you have to read it in the Scottish accent of Sinclair Ferguson.
Oh, dude.
But the way that he brings out the history of Owen and the thought and the theology of Owen and just how John Owen goes about, hold on. Hey, we're recording a podcast episode, and so let me call you right back afterwards, okay?
No, you don't have to. I just wanted to tell you I'm coming tonight.
Okay, cool. We'll see you then. Bye. Now we'll know if that person is a listener to the show, because when this gets released, they'll be like, "Hey, what the heck, man?
And why are you putting me on the podcast?" Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so that's me. I got To the Golden Shore. I got Peace Child. I got 21 Servants of Sovereign Joy, and the Trinitarian Devotion of John Owen.
Oh, wow. Okay, so here is probably where I'm gonna go.
John Owen wasn't a missionary, though. Does that count?
Well, see, we may fudge the numbers just a little bit. Because one of mine is going to be the autobiography of George Mueller.
Dude,
you know, I mean, I'm always struck at Mueller. If anything, if you read it, it's not necessarily just because he was he was the basis. He was probably the best example of faith missions. Just basically like, I'm gonna trust that the Lord's gonna provide, and then I'm just going to go and start doing it.
I could go with that.
And I really appreciated it, but he did it in such a humble way, and it's worked. And it was, I mean, you go figure, right? You know, I'm going to step out in faith and the Lord's going to bless it, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, and so there's lots of different stories, probably have been told a million different times. I'm also just shocked, or impressed would be a better word. It's just a man of prayer that he was.
Yeah. That's inspiring stuff.
I mean, the man had 5 friends that he prayed for, and I think in his lifetime, 3 of them got saved. The 4th maybe at his funeral, and the 5th one like 3 years later. He just like prayed and prayed and prayed, and you're sitting there just like, wow, this man. So when it comes to like persisting in prayer, Mueller. So I would definitely encourage that.
Was that called the autobiography of George Mueller, or was that the one that was called Answers to Prayers? Was that a different book? Because I read Answers to Prayers.
I read the autobiography of Mueller.
Okay, no, I haven't read that one.
Yeah, and so it was, or it might have been a biography of Mueller. I have it in my thing now. I'm second guessing myself. The second one is one of those short books by Piper on David Brainerd. Now I could pull out the book by Jonathan Edwards, the life of David Brainerd, right? Which he was a missionary to the Indians. The interesting thing about that is that from our perspective, you probably would not call David Brainerd the most a very effective missionary. I'm not saying he wasn't.
No, but his metrics were garbage by our
exactly.
standards.
He would probably certain missions boards may not necessarily appreciate what he did.
Way to wheel that one back in, man.
But what was interesting is as I was reading that book, right, where he literally shares the gospel with the whole Indian tribe, and that Native American tribe comes to faith, right, and they love the Lord, and then they get wiped out.
Yep.
And it's just like, but those Native American brothers and sisters are going to be in heaven, and it's all because of David Brainerd, right? Yep. And then he dies. It's just, I mean,
and like what, 23?
Yeah, like you would think, what a, you could think, what a waste, right? And but it's not. I mean, and on top of that, I mean, yeah, there's a whole tribe. Every nation, language, tongue, and tribe. There's a tribe that is in heaven because that man took a translator and just preached. He does not do what we normally would say is good mission work, going there, living among them, and all that stuff. He literally just walked in with a translator who knew the language and started preaching.
Yep.
And people got saved.
Yeah.
So,
and he battled horrible depression.
Oh, yeah.
The whole time. And so that, I mean, that makes him an inspiration right there.
Totally.
It's what he had to fight through to get it done.
Absolutely. I'd say another one which is good, and they've made different movies on this, but I would say Through the Gates of Splendor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a story of Nate Saint and Jim Elliott, right? These are the missionary bush pilots that get in, and they're going in, and they are trying to do missionary work with the Auca Indians, and they essentially get ambushed and killed. But their story, and then how all of that, how all that transpires, and how the tribe comes to faith because of the grace that was shown to them. Just amazing, right?
He is no fool who gives up that which he cannot keep in order to gain that which he cannot lose. Yeah.
And I think another one, and this is just more personal, so I don't have any particular reason. You may not even be able to find this book unless I loan it to you. Is one called The White Fox of India, and the reason is for that.
Sounds like a James Bond movie.
Well, the funny thing is that it's actually the father of one of a mentor in California that I had. His name is George Fox.
Oh yeah,
and so his father has a biography because he was a missionary in India, and so I can read that, and all of a sudden I'll read like one little story, and it's got George, George Jr. there. And, you know, and it's like, oh, there's the guy that I actually knew.
Yeah,
you know,
that's my buddy.
So it's more of a relational thing
Sure.
than anything else. So yeah, those would be my 4.
All right, run us through them again.
So I think I make sure I've got them right. I've got Brainerd. I've got
As written by Piper.
As written by Piper. I've got. Am I missing one?
Mueller.
Maybe I'm missing one. I got Mueller. There we go. And I've got Nate Saint, and I got Through the Gates of Splendor, and then I've got the White Fox of India.
That ought to keep you guys busy till the end of the year. And next year, we'll give you a whole new round of recommendations. Because as these men have taught us, Jesus deserves disciples.
Hungry for Wisdom is a ministry of Grace and Truth Community in West Richland, Washington. You can find out more about us on our app, social media, or at graceandtruthcommunity.com. We love Him because He first loved us.